Welcome to Revving Up with RevEng Consulting, the show that's all about taking a look under the hood of modern revenue growth teams. I'm your host, Matt Haller, and today I'm joined for the first time on the podcast as my partner in crime, Carmen Olmetti. Carmen, welcome to Revving Up.
So good to finally make an appearance here, Matt.
We're excited because we got a great episode in store with Daniel Hirsch, the Director of Finance of Team Services Group, focused on their New York brands. Daniel, welcome to the Revving Up podcast.
It's good to be here.
Would love to get a quick download of your background, where you came from, and how you found yourself into the world of revenue operations.
Initially started in investment banking, spent about 4 years in banking, and realized I wanted to pivot to a more strategic and operational role. Found myself at a growth stage company called Sophia Genetics, which is a precision medicine diagnostic software player. Initially started out closer to strategic finance and corporate development, helped lead the IPO and build out the finance team, and gradually found myself gravitating to the commercial side of the business. With my background in analytical work with our commercial team, RevOps fit hand in hand. I ended up stumbling upon RevOps. There was a vacancy for the sales operations team, and I said, I'll do it. Not really knowing what I was getting into, but ended up leading the RevOps team at Sophia for about 2 years. Had a great experience, learned more than I could have ever imagined. Recently took a new opportunity with Team Services Group as a director of finance. Still working on a lot of similar RevOps work, leveraging a lot of the analytics I previously did. So far, it's going quite well.
Everything's great. We're still in the honeymoon phase.
Exactly. I don't hate my bosses.
As you were going from investment banking into revenue operations, I'm curious, two questions. The first one is, what's the moment that you said, I'm out? And then also, what skills did you find were transferable from the world of investment banking into revenue operations?
Yeah. So the first question, I was working on a pretty big opportunity from September 1st to mid-February. I probably worked every single day, including holidays, every weekend, 8 till midnight at least. I looked around the room, looked at the team I was on, and said, do I see myself in the shoes of the people above me? The answer was no, I don't picture myself doing this. And so took a step back and started networking and learning a lot more about other opportunities. A lot of it came from talking to other people who are out there and honestly just going off of a guess at what I thought was the next best step.
And then in terms of that transferable skill?
Honestly, I think where RevOps is going, so much of the work is foundational analytics. And the analytics is so important. The role of investment bankers and a lot of the work I was focused on was heavy into Excel, looking into data, finding trends. And that was a one-to-one transferable skill where I thought that put me ahead of a lot of other RevOps leaders who have been doing this for even longer. The ability to digest large amounts of data, being able to summarize it, prepare it for executives or board level audiences, incredibly important. Then also being able to tell stories, equally important. As an investment banker, you're oftentimes trying to find shortcuts. And sometimes in RevOps, that's quite important. There's a rule of almost 80-20 where you really want to get 80% of it correct and make decisions from that, and that the extra 20% that'll probably take 2 times as long as the first 80% likely isn't worth it, at least to start.
What were some of the learning curves you had to go through as you're going into a new industry and a new function?
A lot of it just comes from being involved, being in conversations, reading a lot. Operational side of things was brand new. When you're an investment banker, the approach you take is, it's easy to do M&A. You just pay for the company and it just kind of happens. You don't see how much work it takes and how much thought it takes to determine every single thing across every person, system, strategy, role you're acquiring a company and what it takes to run the day-to-day. So you have such a small appreciation for that. And so that was a really steep learning curve that regardless of what the numbers say, there's the entire qualitative view that is sometimes even more important.
What's the saying? That you can make the data say whatever you want it to say. The data will lie all the time.
Yeah.
And it's important to blend the qualitative and the quantitative to get a good view on the ground level. I love that you recognize that when you went in-house working in industry, that there's so much more complexity to running the day-to-day when you come in from the outside as a consultant or a third party and say, I took a look at your data. Here's the things you need to do. It's simple. Just do this. Problem solved. What were some of those roadblocks you need to work through when you keep the lights on every day?
God, it's just everything. If you think about everything that happens to sell one good, there are 20 different teams that all need to be aligned, know when they need to interact, know when they need to do something, and probably 20 different systems and conversations that have across it just to deliver $1 of revenue. If I think about our process, right, you start with basically R&D, building a product that hopefully you can sell. You need to then figure out, how do you train the sales reps? How do you get it into the field? How do you take customer feedback? How do you pass that on to product? And that's before you even sold a single thing or delivered anything. The sheer number of different conversations operations, the different approaches, everything fitting together and then rolling that out and executing on it. Just because you understand it doesn't mean that all 500 other people understand it. The training part is so important. Finding ways to keep it simple so that others can execute on it, but still keeping it holistic so that you're not missing any crucial steps.
Yeah, it's funny that we talk about companies making these big investments in strategies and systems, go over the timeline and over budget. But then what gets lost in the shuffle? The enablement, the training, the why the people who you're paying to manage all of this new stuff need to adopt these new processes, tools, what have you. And it's where a lot of these big fun ideas start to fall down in practice.
Yeah, I've honestly found that a lot of the time people know what needs to be done. Like they know what strategy, they know what needs to happen. It's more the how do we make it happen? How do we free up time? How do we get these teams to do it amidst all the other stuff they're currently doing? So that was certainly one piece that was quite difficult. Just learning through all of that, and that just plays into all the day-to-day. The other issue I would say is data and systems. As a banker, it was pretty easy to get the data. I just asked the client for it, and they had to figure out how to do it. Sitting on this side, I realized that the data sits in 20 different pieces. You can't connect any of it. It takes 5 weeks to get one piece of data. Half the time you realize the data is garbage. As an actual operator, you care if the data is garbage because it'll end up telling the wrong story. Whereas a banker, the data is the data. The client gave it to me. I can only share what they gave me. So learning how to work through that and how to manage that, absolutely important as well.
How did you go through the process of learning where all of that data was so that you could make it useful?
Yeah. So the way I went through it was so many conversations and learning from the people who had been there for 5, oftentimes 10 years. It's very hard when you're a growth stage company, iterating and moving so quickly. But ideally, you have training playbooks that can teach you how to do this and dedicated trainers who can help distill a lot of this information. The way I did it was conversations, and then you need to be using the data, right? Just because someone explains something to you doesn't mean you know how to use it or find it yourself. Spending the time building reports, tracking the data, better understanding it, kind of heads down by yourself, super important.
How did you find the workload shift from banking to working in RevOps, where in banking you might be assigned, yes, it's going to be a very intense project, but your focus area is going to be in 1, maybe 2 opportunities at a time. If you're running a RevOps organization, there's a lot more to do. How do you manage those priorities?
One thing that was interesting, when I was a banker, we were never staffed on just 1 or 2. It was probably 4 or 5. So you learn how to prioritize things. Everything there was very similar. It was often easy to find similarities across the work you were doing, and you could combine it all into one and didn't have to have 10 totally different work streams that require totally different ways of thinking. While I worked more hours at the computer as an investment banker, I found myself spending more time thinking about the business as someone in revenue operations. You're spending so much time across every function when you're a RevOps leader that you find yourself on walks thinking about something that you hadn't had the chance to do. I'm someone who was spending an hour walking my dog thinking about the 20 different things that I hadn't had the chance to do because I was heads down in analytics and hadn't thought about the actual operational processes or how to train certain people. Even though less time at the computer, it was certainly way more time thinking about everything in my day-to-day.
When you're working in banking, there's a lot of different clients, stakeholders, executives that you're going to have to engage with. When you come over into working in RevOps, you've got a whole host of different functions and leaders to report into. Every single person has their own set of priorities. So how did you navigate those relationships, and what was most important when thinking about, like, I have 50 things on the to-do list right now. Which one do I tackle first?
This is one of the hardest things to do. I found success in 2 ways. In order to be really good at RevOps and really just prioritize in any position in a business, you really just need to understand what moves the needle. You need to understand what the corporate priorities are. You need to understand whether you're public or private, who your shareholders are, what they care about, and what will drive those metrics forward. Without understanding that, you really can't prioritize whatsoever. When it came to being at Sophia for 4 years, by the end, I knew what was important. You just naturally know because you know what's moving the needle, you know what people are focused on, other projects that are happening, and you align yourself to that. That also said, there's always competing priorities where 2 things are probably equally important. And I think in those, just having good relationships with your manager, with other leaders, other executives, super important. And just saying, hey, here are the 5 things on my plate. Here's the order I'm going to do them. Here's the timing on them. Do you agree? Do you disagree? and just being honest. If you try and beat around the bush, it's just never going to go well. You'll always have leaders who say their item is more important than a different leader's priority. And so the issue there is figuring out how to navigate. Are you able to pass that feedback on to the other leader whose work is now getting deprioritized? How do you balance that? How do you find ways to manage the personalities? This really relates to being someone who is in that middle level management role and needs to manage up as well as down.
I feel like that skill is so underrated, right? Especially when you're in that middle management role, you're tasked with clarity for the people that report into you while managing the ambiguity that's given to you from above. People look to you to create that clarity so they can get their work done. Is there a secret sauce in how you can balance those two very different worlds and still maintain your sanity and dignity?
Sanity, maybe. Hopefully, dignity. It's really difficult. I think trust is a huge thing with a team. I found that just being honest with my team members helped so much. There were many times where we would have a priority that I disagreed with. You still need to find ways to motivate people. Honestly, I took the approach of telling them, hey, this is why I think they're trying to do it. This is why I don't think it'll work. I understand it might not be perfect. I understand it might take a while, but we need to grind through it. And then we'll get on to the more fun work or the more strategic work, or this is what it will mean for the future. The reality of it is being a middle level manager is oftentimes the hardest thing. It is really hard because you are both managing up and managing down, and you oftentimes also have your own work. Oftentimes you're taking ideas that are a little bit nebulous and trying to figure out how to distill that to someone beneath you without just doing the work for them. Building out a really strong team where they get to know you is incredibly important. The other thing that I think is important is not shielding them from conversations. I've seen people, when you're in the room discussing a really important matter, it'll just be the CRO and yourself. I think bringing in others to see how the conversations are flowing, to see what people are focused on is super important. And oftentimes that will do part of your job for you, where now you won't have to explain to someone who you're working with why something's important. They'll hear it for themselves. And I think through that, they'll learn much more quickly. And hopefully once you've built that rapport with them, they'll be able to produce the work faster than you can explain it to them.
It's almost like you're saying that when you're leading a team, it's really important to have that whole rising tides lift all boats thing. If you start treating your associates and senior associates as junior managers, then they can start taking on junior manager type work, which means they can run with things more independently, potentially one day even interfacing with that CRO. In a world where there's not enough time to do all the things in the day, that seems like it's the big win from a people management perspective.
Someone who I work with told me that one of the most productive things you can do, figure out how to identify talent and hire talent that can take your job and do your job better than you can. The reality is, until you can do that, it's really difficult to continue moving up and take on more initiatives. The other piece is figuring out where you're really strong and where you're less strong and you need to fill the gaps, and finding people on your team who can help do that.
When you do that, and you're building out that team, looking at those gaps, do you try to say, I've built out certain capabilities in one person so that the overall team has enough specificity in one area? Or is it, I want to coach everybody so that everybody gets a little bit of a flavor of jobs that may not be good at, maybe don't like to do, because eventually I'll have more generalists that can do what I need them to?
Yeah, I think it's a balance you need to find. It's not worth it to coach everyone up to the same level across every single skill set. It's just never going to happen, and it depends on someone's background, previous experience, etc. And I think if you try and coach a bunch of generalists, you will never get there. It's really hard to be a 10 out of 10 at 20 things. It's much easier and more efficient to be a 10 out of 10 at 2 or 3 things. So trying to find that amongst your team and cultivate that is probably what I would focus on. That said, you still want the people who aren't doing whatever work they might not be as proficient in, you still want them having the understanding of what's going on so that they can connect the dots. As you know, everything in RevOps is totally connected. The operations plays into the analytics, which plays into the systems, which plays into the enablement. And so if you're just on the analytics side and you don't understand how it's being done in practice, you're going to miss the mark. Figuring out how to make sure that everyone stays aligned, knows what's happening, can connect the dots, but not that everyone is doing the actual work, is something the team should strive for.
So it's like everyone should have enough context on their team to know why why the system's set up a certain way, but that doesn't mean that they need to be the ones pushing the changes into Salesforce. They might need to know where the data lives in a certain data table without needing to be the person who sets that table up for measurement.
Exactly.
We are coming to the end of our episode. We've talked about a lot of leadership things, some management things. I guess if you were to take away a lesson from your first jump into RevOps and tell the next person coming behind you, what is that advice that you would give them that would make their journey a little bit easier?
I don't know if it'll make it easier, but I think it will save them time in the end. This is something that I personally learned from you guys. Everything is connected. As an investment banker, you have the numbers and you just need to spit out whichever ROI is higher. And that's the recommendation. If you come in with that approach, you're quickly going to fail, and you need to realize that roles and responsibilities feeds into how the system's built, which is all based off of go-to-market. And go-to-market informs the roles and responsibilities, and it's basically a web of intertwined things that need to work in cohesion. And if you try and tackle one thing alone, you're likely going to find that you push an update that you're going to have to change in the end, and that you're not tackling everything from an end-to-end process. You're never going to get to an efficient system. You're going to just solve one problem, and then the next problem's going to pop up.
I did not ask for such a nice, glowing review of the work that we have done, but I will take it and completely agree. The challenge is finding a balance between, do I need to look at something end to end and look at the whole model, or do I need to just look at one tiny piece of it? It's very easy to look at one piece and then keep blowing up until you look at the whole model. But the key is knowing to have a good perspective of what the forest looks like while knowing which tree you're standing next to. Daniel, I do have one last question for this episode. It's a little more personal because I know that you are a New Yorker who made their way to Boston, my hometown. So I have to ask, what are the things that surprised you about moving to Boston and living there versus just being a New Yorker who visits to hate on the Red Sox?
That's an incredibly good question. For some background, when I took this job with Sophia, I was fully remote living in New York. And it got to the point where I said, I don't want to live in New York anymore. I want to move to Boston because your day-to-day and your lifestyle is just way better. There weren't many surprises at first. I kind of knew what I was getting myself into. What I've loved about being in Boston specifically is there's so many good places to travel from here versus New York. It's incredible. I mean, the summers here are like unbelievable, where you can go north to Maine, you can go south, there's the Cape, there's Nantucket, there's Rhode Island, there's Martha's Vineyard. In the winter, there's ski mountains. I think just having Boston as a central base is oftentimes, and I would say just generally, like the travel and access to a lot of adventures is much easier to find in Boston than New York.
I'm going to make sure we take that clip and send it to Mayor Wu for Visit Boston, and we'll do a whole campaign around that. Hear that, New Yorkers? There's more than just the Hamptons in the summer.
People in Boston are much friendlier than I ever expected, and definitely friendlier than people in New York.
All right, we have to wrap this episode. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Revving Up with RevEng Consulting. Be sure to join us next week as we unpack a specific chapter of Daniel's illustrious career. Join us next week.